DNeg was tasked with creating the majority of the visual effects for Bullet Train. This included the LED screen background imagery that finds itself in the undefined grey area between special and visual effects, because they are CG backgrounds that weren't created in post-production but rather captured in camera during principal photography. The design of the train was based on existing bullet train models. There were 3 full train cars built for the film to be used for principal photography, and as a stand-in for stunts and performances outside the train. But it was always planned that the exterior shots would be replaced with their digital model because the body of the train had to reflect everything in the digital environment that would be around it. Bullet trains, or Shinkansen, are kept meticulously clean, but unfortunately a meticulously clean digital asset just doesn't look real. So DNeg had to take extra care to add fine details such as surface scratches to the panel seams, tarnished screws, and panel bends in order to add that lacking layer of realism. The LED volume that surrounded the train consisted of 2 large 30-metre long and 5-metre high LED walls on each side of the train car, with 2 smaller 2.5-metre by 5-metre walls at each end of the train, making it a total of 6 screens. But this only provided enough LED wall to cover the length of 1 car, and there were a total of 3 built for the project. So Lux Machina came up with a solution of suspending the entire setup from a track and dolly system to help it move along the length of the train depending on which car was needed for shooting. While there had to be gaps in the walls at the ends to allow them to move trains and screens independently of each other and for stage access, those gaps were positioned so that they were generally out of sight of the camera. DNeg's background content was delivered to the screens through a disguise playback system provided and operated by Lux Machina. The train's backgrounds were split between daytime and nighttime sequences. The LED walls worked perfectly for night, tunnel, dawn and low light areas of the journey, but for daytime scenes the amount of light the LED screens could put out just wasn't enough. So for these scenes, the LED walls were switched to display blue screen or green screen that could later be replaced with CG environments in post. There were a variety of techniques used to create the background content for the LED walls. To start with, background plates were filmed throughout Japan. Unfortunately, you can't just stick a camera array rig onto a Shinkansen train and start filming. So instead, they filmed with a rig on top of a van on long stretches of Japanese highway. But the Japanese highways are a lot bumpier and slower than the 300km/h bullet train is. So DNeg had to spend a considerable amount of time stabilising these plates and retiming them to be 5 or 6 times faster than those they originally filmed. These highway plates also gave them a great reference for lighting, colour and detail that they could then use for their CG content. Bullet Train is quite a stylised film, so the background footage couldn't just be the mundane backgrounds they shot on the highway. There were moments where the director wanted to go through a city and have the streets flooded with red or blue lights, or have another train passing by, or lots of neon signage. So, environment artists built out city streets with a variety of architecture that was unique to Japan, as well as street dressing, signage, rivers, bridges and parks. Train tracks with fences and overhead rail and cable structures were also added to give the rhythmic repetition and sense of speed that you get when travelling at 300km/h. In order to display this content, they needed one solution that would work with the different content from arrays to CG environments. Real-time camera tracking and rendering on set wasn't the right option because of the array plates, which would have a baked-in perspective. So, they chose to render out the CG in a way that was similar to the array plates once they were all stitched together. This gave them a massive resolution image sequence that they could then break apart into the separate panel sections of the LED screens. They built the CG bullet train asset anticipating the considerable destruction that it would have to undergo in the third act of the film. The train's destruction is featured very close up and in slow motion, so they needed it to have a lot of complexity. Underneath the exterior, they had aluminium framing with foam wall panels, rubber seals, bundles of cables, electrical boxes and more. The train had 4 unique car types, including economy, first class, lounge and driver cars, each with their own unique interior designs and props that could be thrown around and broken to add detail and complexity to the sequence. The first part of the train destruction is when they had to rip it open in what they ended up calling the can opener scene. The whole side gets shredded open, then they switch to a pre-destroyed train to give them realistic damage that blended seamlessly into the on-set destroyed car. For the very end of the film, they go full speed into the end-of-the-line station. Once they hit the station, they transitioned into full CG, and the actors were shot fully on a blue-screen soundstage. Quite a lot of previs had to go into the scene because it's pretty complex. They had to get Brad Pitt from the driver car flying through various train cars with all the walls and chairs and props peeling away and shredding in slow motion around him, flying by other characters, getting hit by recognizable props and then safely crashing into this costume character at the end. They had to build a 360-degree wirework rig that allowed Brad Pitt to rotate in all directions as he was flying down the train. Then they added all the train shearing away around them. When building the external CG environment, they had to do it with destruction in mind as well. They had a mountainside with tons of vegetation, trees, rocks and gravel that they could plow through, as well as the plaza environment where they finally come to a stop. They consulted a lot of reference materials in order to build out a traditional touristy Japanese plaza that they could smash into. And that is what makes this scene arguably the greatest DNeg produced in the entire film, because the whole sequence is just so crazy, so unreal, so completely unbelievable that the audience would obviously know it just wasn't possible and therefore had to be computer generated. But DNeg managed to give everything just enough detail, just enough humour and just enough realism that even though we knew it was CG, we didn't care.